What's going on, everybody? Is Kolev, and to this day in Marvel Snap there's 229 cards in the game. Most people do not have all the cards. I'm not sure if anybody actually has all the cards because there definitely is a lot of grinding to it. But when it comes to a free-to-play game, there's no way really to pay to win. You can't pay to buy cards directly. Now you can pay, like I went over in some of my other videos, pay to buy gold, which then gets you credits, which you could then use to upgrade your cards, climb up the ladder, and get more cards as you go into different pools. But ultimately, there's a lot of cards in the game is what I'm trying to say. And a massive update is about to drop relatively soon that's going to include 17 brand new cards with their own abilities. Some are really good, some are a little more questionable, and some are just relatively neutral cards. I'm going to go over all 17 in this video. There are a lot of other things that are dropping in this update, so if you do want more information on that, let me know down in the comments and I will make a video going over everything else. But with that being said, let's get right into the video. Alright, so our first card, we got She-Hulk. She's going to be a 6 cost, 10 power, which by itself is already pretty strong. Slightly below her counterpart Hulk. Her ability costs 1 less for each unspent energy last turn. So if you're playing a build where you're not really spending all your energy, you're able to play cards that have a lot of power without you having to spend your energy. She is extremely solid. This game is really all about energy efficiency. You want to be able to utilize all of your cards and all of your energy in the best possible way, and it's energy management. That's really how you win games, being able to spend efficiently but also being able to strategize and rethink your strategy based on what your opponent is doing. If you're playing a deck that allows you to have an excess amount of energy, there are some cards that actually get buffed, like Sunspot. Whenever you don't spend all your energy, that can be an awesome pair and synergy with this card in your deck. The next card is going to be a 1 cost, 5 power, extremely strong card. I think for sure one of the best cards in this lineup of new cards in the game, without a doubt. When any card is played at this location, this card switches sides. That honestly isn't a huge deal, but it can be depending on what locations you're actually playing at. She could get put into a really bad location, but on the flip side, where locations destroy your card if you play it there, or have some type of debuff if you play cards there, if she happens to go to that location, then all of a sudden you have an extremely powerful card there without having to play it. Therefore, the strategies kind of just keep increasing. I'm not entirely sure if she's just an automatic card in most of the decks. So far, she's looking extremely solid. But again, depending on the locations, and that's really where all the buts are with this card, is if the location has debuffs or really negative effects whenever cards move there, then she becomes really weak. But at face value, she is an extremely strong card with 5 power at 1 cost. Now, Luke Cage is more of a scenario based card, and I don't see a lot of scenarios really happening. He is a 2 cost, 1 power card, so already there in itself, he's relatively weak of a card, especially with it being 2 power. His ability, ongoing, your cards can't have their power reduced. Now, there's not a ton of cards that actually reduce your power. Spider-Woman is one of the biggest cards and the strongest cards that actually do this. So I have trouble kind of trying to figure out where to really put this card, because you don't really know what your opponents have until you play them. So you would kind of just have this card as a sort of trump card in your deck. You wouldn't really just kind of place him nonchalant, although you could. With him being a 2 power 1 cost, it's not a very strong card. I would definitely put this in the lower end. I don't see a lot of the decks that I personally use. I don't see me adding this card whenever they do come out, but I think he's a lower to neutral card overall. Now, the Absorbing Man at a 4 cost, 3 power is a pretty strong card. At face value, it doesn't really seem that strong, but most of the strength comes in its ability. As an honor reveal, if the last card you played has an honor reveal ability, this card copies it. This card will be extremely OP if you can pair it with a card like Odin, but obviously since Odin is a 6 power card, there's not a lot of scenarios in which you'll be able to place an Odin before this card. But at face value, with you being able to copy another honor reveal ability, you can pretty much double, if not triple, depending on the card that you're copying, a location's power pretty quickly. Now, Maria Hill is going to be a 2-cost 3-power card, and I don't really think that she is a very strong card. Her ability is on reveal, add a random 1-cost to your hand. Now, overall, there's some other cards that I think are a lot weaker than this card, but RNG aspects of card games, especially since drawing the cards by themselves are RNG, I tend to try to stay away from as much RNG as possible. This pretty much just adds another RNG element to your game, but could potentially give you a lot of good benefits since it specifically draws 1 cost. So if you pair it with something like a Khazar or another card that buffs 1-cost cards, then obviously Maria Hill doesn't really matter what 1-cost you pull because she's going to benefit from your other cards. You definitely have to play Maria Hill around other buffing 1-cost cards. You definitely want to have other 1-cost cards in your deck to also benefit from this type of gameplay. Now, Agent Coulson, I'm not exactly sure how to say his name. A lot of these cards, I don't know how to say them. He's going to be a 3-cost 4-power card, and I don't think he's very strong of a card, to be honest. His on reveal is to add a random 4-cost and 5-cost card to your hand. Now, my main gripe and problem with this is, again, like I just stated, is the RNG. You don't know what exactly that you're going to get. With it being 4 to 5 cost, generally up to the 5 and even the 4 most of the time, those cards are very specific to your deck, and you kind of want to play the ones that you already have in your deck. There's not a lot of scenarios in which I would want to play another random card unless it was a 0 cost, I got it for free, or maybe if the random card you get actually goes extremely well against your enemy. Otherwise, this card isn't very strong in a lot of scenarios and really kind of pulls away from whatever playstyle you want to play, which could be a good thing, but I think most of the time it's not really a positive. Now, Helicarrier is definitely an interesting and one of the more interesting cards in the entire lineup. It is a 6-cost 10 power, so it's extremely strong, stronger than America Chavez, slightly weaker than Hulk. So at face value, it's a relatively decent card, but its ultimate abilities really come down to what it actually does. So when you discard this from your hand, you replace it with 3 random cards. Again, it's kind of carrying on that RNG aspect, but if you pair it with a card such as Blade that discard the cards in your hand, then it actually could be pretty solid if you also have a different 6 energy card in your hand. The 3 random cards could be potentially beneficial, but you can easily pull 3 6 energy cards and be kind of stuck because you can't really play most of them. You can maybe play 1. So again, the RNG in cards I try to stay away from. With this one being a 6-cost 10 power, it is pretty strong on its own. So if you do pair it, like I said, with a Blade or something else that kills cards, like I believe Swordmaster as well, then it could be relatively beneficial and you can get something that you need at that specific moment. The next card, I believe you say M'Baku, something like that. I'm not exactly sure. So he's a 1-cost 2-power card. I don't think this is a very strong card at all, really. At face value, he's relatively similar to most 1-card cost, being 1-2. I would rather have a Nightcrawler over this card. Yao 2, however you say, the little bald guy, I would rather have those cards over him. Anyways, his ability, if this is in your deck, then at the end of the game, it leaps to a random location. With it being only 2 power, I don't really see scenarios in which 2 extra power will help you. It could, don't get me wrong, it definitely could, but the fact that this card on top of that has to be in your deck, not in your hand, in your deck, which by the end of the game, you most likely drew most of the cards from your deck, you immediately wouldn't be able to play cards that draw other cards from your deck because you want this card in your deck. So you're potentially losing on different plays and different scenarios that you could play your hand. I don't really see this card being that powerful. Maybe there's something that I'm missing. If you know of a way that you could play this card that could be very beneficial, definitely let me know down in the comments. But as I'm looking at it now, I don't see it being that strong in my opinion. The next card is also a very interesting card. With it being 4-cost 10 power, it seems extremely strong at face value. But when you look at its ability, it kind of makes you think. and the scenarios in which you use this card are kind of uncertain. So if you have another card here at the end of your turn, destroy this. So you definitely would play it by itself in some location, kind of leave it alone, and then be able to play afterward. In that scenario, yes, of course, for a 4 cost 10 power card, this card is amazing, but you definitely have to play around that and understand and really formulate your entire deck around this card. Now, with it being 10 power, 4 cost, it may be worth creating a deck specifically for this. My Khazar deck is pretty much based on Khazar, which is also a 4 cost, but it also relies on Blue Marvel, which is a 5 cost. So this card overall is extremely powerful. I think this is definitely one of the better cards in the lineup. Orca is another kind of solo type card. In a way, it is 6 cost, 9 power, which is relatively decent. Similar to America Chavez, but when you look at its ability, it gets a lot stronger. So ongoing plus 5 power if this is the only card here. Now, this is definitely a scenario based card. Maybe you have a location where you only can put 1 card there. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to play around this card. With it being a 6 energy cost, it's kind of your last in-game card, so you want to be able to utilize it to its maximum ability. But you can't pair it with anything that buffs it because it needs to be alone. So there's not a lot of scenarios in which this card is super solid, but I think overall it's neutral. I think there is some place for it. I just can't really see it yet. Going into the pool 5 cards, we got Galactus. This is definitely an interesting card, and I think a lot of big brain plays can be had with this. It's going to be a 6 cost, 3 power card, and that by itself is not that strong. But its strength really becomes in its honor availability, where if this is your only card at that location, destroy all other locations. This is hard because it affects you as well. So really the strength of this card comes in when you have locations that are strictly playing against your deck, your playstyle. Then playing this card for sure will be able to benefit you, as it will just negate all the negative effects that those locations are having on your cards. Otherwise, that's really the main scenario I see you playing this card, because I know there's definitely a lot of games where I get locations that aren't favorable for me at all, and they're a lot more favorable for my opponent. So I think having Galactus in those instances is massive. But I will also have another 6 cost card in my deck as well, because I might not want to use Galactus. Again, it's more scenario based depending on what you're going up against, but overall is a pretty strong card. Now, I think that Valkyrie is one of the strongest cards in the lineup and will potentially be one of the strongest cards in the game, as it's such a power shift and could really change the entire outcome of the game. With Valkyrie being a 5 cost, 3 power, it doesn't seem that great at all, but since it's a 5 cost, it's not exactly the finisher of the game, but it really can be, and could change absolutely everything, and the opponent will pretty much not expect it. So on reveal, set all cards at this location to 3 power. Now you can use it to maybe benefit yourself. Maybe you have some really weak 1 cost cards, or maybe you have the other card like I said above. Maybe you can use this card to buff all of your weak 1 cost cards, but it's really used more offensively against your opponent, to where maybe your opponent has stacked up 30 plus power in one location. This will set all of their cards to 3 power, which could be massive and completely shift the entire game. So Valkyrie for sure is one of the strongest cards so far. Now, Super Scroll is a relatively decent card. It's okay at face value. Again, it doesn't look that strong with it being 4 cost, 2 power, but I think it's also kind of weak in its ability because it depends on your opponent. So ongoing, it has the ongoing effects of all enemy cards. Now that could be really solid, but if you go against somebody that doesn't have an ongoing card deck, doesn't have really strong ongoing card abilities, then the card really isn't that strong. I think that if you put this card in your deck, you want to also have another 4 card cost that actually complements the deck that you're trying to play. I think this is more of a trump card, a card that you have up your sleeve to be able to play to get yourself out of a situation that you might be in. But by itself, I don't think it's a very strong card. It's definitely heavily scenario based. Doesn't make it bad, I think it's above neutral to relatively decent card. I think Shuri is definitely one of the other stronger cards in this entire lineup, as she doubles the power of the next card you play as an on reveal effect. She is a 4-cost 2-power card. It's definitely a tide shifter. You could be losing a location, play Shuri down, and simply double the strength of that card. This could work very well with an Odin type setup where you play her on the 5th turn, double Odin's power since he is relatively strong by himself, but then also double all of your on reveal abilities, which obviously includes cards like this. So she can be very strong, and she definitely has a place in the current meta. One of the strongest cards so far. Now, Bast is a weird card, and I think is definitely one of the cards I can't really see myself playing, kind of just based on my own play style, and I don't really see a place for this card. It's a 1-cost 1-power card, has an on reveal ability where it sets the power of all of the cards in your hand to 3. Again, very scenario based. You could have pulled your entire endgame cards, which have a lot of power. This card would be completely useless. So in those scenarios, it's not really strong. But if you happen to pull, some of your weaker 1-cost cards in the beginning, then yeah, that 1-power buff to most of them will be extremely strong, right? Since most 1-card cost cards are 2-power, it could be relatively good, but it's a very specific scenario, and I try to stay away from these types of cards and RNG cards as much as I can. Now, finally, the massive card that kind of changes the game and really might be the meta in the coming future. Thanos, being a 6-cost 8-power card, is absolutely insane. At the start of the game, you shuffle 6 Infinity Stones into your deck. We're about to go over all the Infinity Stones right now and see how they actually affect the gameplay, because they definitely do. They shift the tide, they add energy, they do all sorts of things that really change how you play going forward. So we're gonna go over those right now. The first is gonna be the Mind Stone. So on reveal, draw 2 stones from your deck, which obviously is huge because the stones can have massive effects. Let's go ahead and check the next one out. The next is going to be the Power Stone, costing 1, with the power being 3, already pretty solid and stronger than most 1-card cost cards by itself. So the ongoing effect is if you played all 6 stones, Thanos has plus 10 power. Wherever he is, it doesn't matter, he is going to be plus 10, making him an 18 power card. Now, this card is okay. Now, this card could potentially be the strongest out of all of them, but also the weakest if you do not obtain all 6 cards. But with it being a 1-cost 3-power, it is still pretty solid on its own. The Reality Stone is going to be a 1-cost 1-power card, where on reveal, transform this location into a new one, simply like Scarlet Witch, but you also get to draw a card. The draw card is extremely important because you could draw another stone. The Soul Stone is going to be a 1-cost 1-power card as well, where its on reveal effect is going to draw a card firstly, and has an ongoing effect where the enemy cards here at the location have -1 power. This is definitely one of the strongest stones out of all of them. Actually, one of the most powerful cards in the game for what it is at 1 cost, with it being by itself able to change the tide of a location into your favor. The next card is going to be the Space Stone with 1-cost 1-power as well. Its on reveal effect is going to be the next turn you can move 1 card at this location, and then you also draw a card. Now, that is pretty huge as well. You can potentially turn any card into Nightcrawler or Vision, allow that card to move over, and it could, again, you can power shift the board. You can win a location that your opponent thought he already won because you placed a card that you can't move. You place the Space Stone, and now everything changes. Finally, the last new card in this massive update and the last Infinity Stone that we have here is going to be the Time Stone. 1-cost 1-power, gain 1 energy next turn and draw a card. Again, a huge shift in how you play your cards. The enemy might not see it coming and not expect you to be able to play certain cards that you're going to be able to play, and depending on when you play the Time Stone can also shift the tide of powerful cards that you play to ultimately win the game. So the Time Stone for sure is a really strong card. All right, guys, and that's going to be all the cards coming out in the latest update. Pretty awesome cards, very powerful cards. There are a couple cards that I'm not exactly sure about, a couple cards I feel like I won't play, but overall the entire lineup here is looking very solid. They're creating a lot of creative type cards, a couple RNG ones, a couple scenario based, and some cards that are just extremely solid and should honestly be in most decks, and I think are going to become very meta cards in the future. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, if you learned anything new, please leave a like down below and a sub. It really helps me out, helps my channel out. I appreciate y'all being here. And of course, like always, y'all have a good one.